It is now time this evening where I have the great pleasure of introducing our special guest. And we are joined tonight by John Elkington, who is one of the founders of the sustainability movement. He is an advisor to executives. He is a keynote speaker at numerous conferences, and he's a real thought leader in this space. So it's a real pleasure to have him joining us tonight. Let me just give a little bit of detail about John. In 2008, the Evening Standard named John among the 1,000 most influential people in London, describing him as, quote, a true green business guru and as an evangelist for corporate, social, and environmental responsibility long before it was fashionable. In 2009, a CSR International survey of the top 100 CSR leaders placed John fourth after Al Gore, Barack Obama, the late Anita Roddick of The Body Shop, and alongside Muhammad Yunus of Grameen Bank. John has addressed over 1,000 conferences around the world. He was a faculty member of the World Economic Forum from 2002 to 2008. He served on over 70 boards and advisory boards. John has won numerous awards and is the author of or co-author of 20 books. John's Cannibals with Forks in 1997 popularized his triple bottom line concept, people, planet, and profit, and laid the foundations for a sustainable business strategy. His 20th book has just been published, and the title is Green Swans, The Coming Boom in Regenerative Capitalism. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to Showcase, John.
Gordon, it's a thrill to be part of it, and good evening, everyone.
You know, I think a lot of our audience will be familiar with Nicholas Taleb's book about black swans, where he describes a black swan as a rare event characterized by its extreme impact, but its retrospective predictability. What do you mean when you talk about green swans?
Well, to do a gross injustice to Taleb's black swan, I mean, he meant things that sort of came out of the blue and went exponential, and they could take you good places, but largely, very often, they took you bad places. So I've chosen to contrast things that take us back bad places exponentially, places we don't want to go, with those trajectories that potentially at least take us exponentially where we do want to go, to better places. And so far, people have let me get away with it, and it seems to have stimulated a certain amount of interest, but happily to go into that a little bit more if you want.
Yes, if you could tell us that, because I think you talk about what would be a green swan event.
Well, one of the areas that I'm fascinated by is the way in which major countries or regional blocs now are announcing massive recovery packages, and they're choosing, as with the EU Green Deal or the Biden-Harris administrations, whether they call it Green New Deal or whatever they finally call it. You know, the EU one is 1.82 trillion euros. The American one is anywhere between 1.9 and 3 trillion dollars. This is a large sum of money taken collectively. But what's interesting is they're all targeting green outcomes, sustainable outcomes, you know, decarbonization outcomes, and crucially, you know, social inclusion. So sometimes it's environmental justice, sometimes there's social inclusion, but this is a phase change in our politics, and I think it's a phase change in markets. So if businesses aren't already thinking about that, they really ought to be.
Yeah, I think some people might say, well, aren't these problems just kind of an identification issue? We should just identify the problems and get on with solving them. But I know you explained how it may not be that simple, because a lot of our problems have evolved to become what you describe wicked problems. Maybe you could tell us a bit more about what you mean by that.
Yeah, the term wicked and even super wicked problems sort of has been around for quite some time. And when I first heard it, I was working for the Ford Motor Company at the time in Michigan, and I didn't terribly like the concept. But the more I've come across it over time, the more I've perhaps understood it and therefore appreciated. And the point about a wicked problem is that it's so complex that it almost seems to resist solution. And so, for example, if you take the plastics in the ocean issue that has been pressing in recent years, if you take antibiotic resistance, or you take chronic obesity and all the diseases that cluster around that, particularly diabetes. These things are systemic. And if you look at a country like Mexico now, which has the highest obesity rate and therefore one of the highest diabetes rates in the world, these things are very, very difficult to think your way around and through. You've really got to sort of configure the way that you think about the problems. And I think that is one of the key characteristics of wicked problems. And in terms of super wicked problems, the climate emergency and possibly the biodiversity emergency alongside that, both been described as super wicked. In a sense, they're even more damnably complicated.
I guess, you've been an advocate for change for more than 40 years, and you've had the opportunity to speak with countless executives, government officials. I'd be curious to hear how you feel kind of the dialogue has evolved, particularly in the last 20 years. And then also, I'm sure people want to know, what is the hurdle that keeps people from kind of doing the actions if we do understand what we need to be doing? What keeps the action from happening?
Well, perhaps let's start with the hurdles, and they're as simple as human nature. They're as simple as sort of the Friedmanite or Friedman-esque approach to business and markets and capitalism. In terms of human nature, we tend not to think terribly long term if we can avoid it. And therefore, if we suddenly find ourselves in a geological epoch, the Anthropocene, where one species, our own, is just having effects on our planet equivalent to geological forces, that's beyond our pay grade. We really don't want to think about that if we possibly can avoid it. But we're increasingly being forced to think about it. It's becoming a very intrusive part of our everyday realities. So I think those sort of human nature barriers are often addressed, as in paradigm shifts, by a generational change, or in some cases, 2 generational changes, where you get rid of one group of people who chose to believe in the previous paradigm, and then the people they taught. So I think these are human, they're cultural, they're economic in the sense our economics are not always telling the truth about the world in which we live. I'm actually oddly, though, optimistic. I think that if you look back at our history, and history has always been one of my favorite subjects, what you see is our species very often resists acting until it has no choice in the matter. Well, now we're actually at a point in all of this where it's very clear that our ecological systems, our atmospheric systems, are starting to wobble in a way that we have not seen for 8,000, 9,000 years in our sort of civilized history. And therefore, I think over the next 10 to 15 years, as the paradigm really gets to work and people realize we live on a very small planet and we're affecting pretty much everything, I think we're going to see off the scale action. Whether it's going in the right direction, it's being done by the right people, all the rest of it, that's to be determined. But there's no question that the next decade and beyond will be accelerated in ways that sort of outside most people's experience, I think.
Yeah, I know you talked about societal pressure waves that have been happening since, I think you described 5 of them since 1994, and that we're now in the 5th one. And the term that you use to describe it is that it's going to be the regeneration phase, where we're looking at a regeneration of economics, societies, and the biosphere.
Well, it's interesting because, yes, we started to plot those waves in 1994, but we tracked them back to 1960.
Okay.
And if you think about the paradigm that's been sort of gradually taking root around the world, environmentalism was part of that. Earth Day in 1970 was part of that. But then you get these ups and downs, and very often a societal pressure wave comes through, driven by all sorts of different issues, concerns, interests, or whatever. And then you have a peak period, and then you have something that goes wrong. It may be a Gulf War, it may be a major recession, or whatever it is, and things then go back on the back burner. Mm-hmm. And what's really spectacularly different about this 5th wave, which I sort of tend to slap the Greta wave label on, because she didn't cause it. but she certainly focused the energy, and she spoke for generations of people who've been pretty mute on some of these subjects for quite a long time. This is the first time where, with COVID-19 and a global downturn, the interest in climate change and these sort of systemic challenges has actually grown quite substantially, because people can see COVID and pandemics like that as one more example of what happens when you live in a shrinking world with an expanding population and everything starts to link to everything else. Your governance, your politics have to change. And so far, we've really not gone very far down that route.
Yeah. Tonight is showcase night, where we have four of our impact founders that are doing startups, and Impact Central is all about helping startups that have both a business but also kind of a missional purpose, whether it's societal, focused on society, or the environment. And I guess what's exciting is, in addition to the founders, of course, our audience is also a lot of people that are change makers. They want to see things change. I guess sometimes if you think a startup so small, does it make any difference? Versus people feeling the problems are so huge. What would you say in terms of, what can any individual do? What are the things that people could do to get involved to make a change?
Well, firstly, I should say declare an interest, which is, I love the sort of people that you're showcasing. I think the people who think they can change the world decide to give it a go, and a fair few of them actually manage to do something along the way. There are a lot of casualties, and I think that the courage that people need to do some of this stuff, it can be at times immense, but I admire them beyond measure, and a better future absolutely depends on people like that. So I think it was ridiculous that whatever index it was put me alongside Muhammad Yunus. I mean, he has a level of vision and a level of entrepreneurial can-do energy, which I think is just off the scale. And you don't have to be at that sort of level. I mean, I've often had younger social entrepreneurs almost crying on my shoulder, because they say, I can't do that. I can do what I'm trying to do, and if things turn out well, it'll be useful, but not at the sort of Grameen Bank scale. And I think we should be very careful of overloading people with our ambitions. I mean, their own ambitions are quite enough. I love what they're doing. I do think, though, that they're going to need a lot more support than they currently get. We tend to think it's a fire and forget model. You give them some startup funding and they'll go away and make all this happening. I think it's very interesting to hear business leaders increasingly talking about system change. Mm-hmm. They didn't talk about that sort of 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, but now they're beginning to recognize that many elements of our market economies and societies are not working particularly well. So I think some of these entrepreneurs, some of these innovators are pioneering, prospecting in new business models, new ways of thinking about things. But bigger companies have got to get behind them. The political system's got to get behind them. And in a way, I think part of what you're doing in showcasing all of that is just making sure that these examples are better known. And I think that in itself will have quite a useful impact in terms of mobilizing interest and commitment. Just a final point. I mean, I've watched the ethical investment, socially responsible investment, impact investment realms evolve over time. How extraordinary it is now that we have, $500 billion worth of impact investment. Last time I looked, it's still relatively small compared to the trillions that are sluicing around the global economy every day or every week. But by God, we're making progress. And I think let's celebrate that, but also let's challenge each other and make sure that whatever we're doing, it's as good as it can be, and that it doesn't simply tick one sort of set of boxes, say environmental or financial or whatever, but as far as possible, it's a properly integrated solution.
John, really appreciate your optimism in that last comment, and all the things that you've done over time. I think for many of us, for most of us, It's been 40 years since your first book, and we're kind of catching up to the vision that you laid out there. Now with Green Swans, you've once again given us kind of a roadmap and a vision for some of the things we could be doing going forward. So thank you very much, and highly recommend everybody to pick up your book. I think it's a great read, a great way for us to think about the future and hopefully create a lot more Green Swan events. So thank you very much for being with us tonight.
No, it's a great pleasure. And if I may just say one final thing, and it's to the question you asked me, which I sort of ducked or forgot. I think this is going to happen. This is going to happen on a scale that is actually going to amaze a lot of people. So the people that you're spotlighting, celebrating, supporting, they're going to have a much bigger impact collectively over time. So more power to them, more power to you. And I'd love to keep posted as that all develops.
Great.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, John.